Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, revisiting the series through two games, my predictions from before game one, how they're shaping out through the first two Wolves wins. We'll also look ahead to game three tonight in Phoenix and game four on Sunday. My predictions for the next couple of days, we'll look at the FanDuel line, we'll look at adjustments that Phoenix might make to their offense. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend and happy game three game day. Timberwolves are in Phoenix tonight. First road game of these playoffs, of course, ahead of game four on Sunday as well. So a pair of games this weekend in the desert. We'll preview that. We'll talk about kind of resetting the series to this point. Only two games in, but just kind of looking back at what my predictions were a week ago, what I thought would happen over the first couple of games and how those are shaping out. It was exactly a week ago when we previewed the series last Friday, the kind of the final preview prediction show. So I want to revisit all that. We'll get to all that here today and more. A big thank you, first off, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon at Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. A couple of additional reminders. If you can't watch the game tonight for whatever reason, you can listen on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves. You can hear Alan Horton on the hometown call, play-by-play from Game 3 Wolves and Suns. Again, just search Minnesota Timberwolves on the SXM app on SiriusXM to find the radio broadcast. Also, not only do we here at Locked On Wolves cover your team every day, but we also give you instant episodes after every single game. Check out the Locked On Wolves postcast on the Locked On Wolves podcast feed right here, the audio feed, wherever you're listening to the audio. If you're on YouTube, you can stream it on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. Get rapid reaction to the biggest moments with the Locked On Wolves postcast. I believe it'll be Jack Borman joining Luke Inman this evening following game three. It'll be late, but it'll be worth a watch on YouTube if you're able to join them live. All right. I want to go back through some of my key predictions, or I guess not necessarily a little bit predictions, a little bit like things to look out for in the series from a week ago, and just kind of update where we're at through two games, where I was right, where I was wrong thus far. And this was actually, I guess, mid last week. I did kind of a four factors kind of peel back of how both the Wolves and the Suns were in the regular season against each other, and then also just kind of on their own, and then how those things aligned. So one of the things I flagged was, in the season series, the Timberwolves turned the ball over 15 more times in Phoenix across just three games. And of course, Sunday, game 82 of the regular season was a minus 11. So that was a big part of it. But overall, the Wolves were a negative turnovers across three losses in the regular season to Phoenix. One of my key takeaways coming to the playoffs, though, is that Phoenix was actually more turnover prone offensively than Minnesota was in the regular season, which surprised me. The Timberwolves actually improved a little bit toward the end of the season. The Wolves were actually 23rd in the league in turnover rate, according to Clean the Glass, 14.5%. Phoenix turned it over at 14.9%. So basically 15% of the time, which was two slots worse than the Wolves in terms of league-wide ranking. Defensively, though, Minnesota was actually fifth in forcing opponent turnovers, and Phoenix was 24th. So Minnesota basically forces a couple more turnovers per game on average than what Phoenix does, and they both turn it over a similar amount. So I thought the Wolves would actually have a real shot at winning the turnover battle in this series. And sure enough, through two games, they have a massive lead. Well, I should say, I guess it's not as massive. It was a net zero in game one, but they were +6 in game two. So across two games, 6 less turnovers than Phoenix, I guess is a better way to say that because, well, anyway. Turnovers were even in game one. The Wolves had 6 less turnovers than Phoenix in game two. So that has turned out to be something that has come true, something that I was keeping an eye out for. Now, I think a lot of this is, I don't know. You have to credit the Wolves defense. I don't actually think Phoenix's offense has been all that sloppy. It's not like they're overpassing. If anything, Phoenix is underpassing. We'll talk a little more about the Suns offense here in a little bit, but I think this is more of a credit to the Timberwolves defense and their activity level, certainly their physicality, but also the activity combined with their length, which of course is kind of at the crux of why the Wolves defense is so good in the first place. Is the size, obviously, the athleticism, the length, but that's converting here in the playoffs, at least in the first 2 games of the series at home for Minnesota. And of course that needs to carry forward, but the turnover thing to me is significant and more a credit to Minnesota than necessarily an indictment on Phoenix, in my opinion. It's not like Phoenix has had a crazy number of unnecessary, unforced errors, right? Another thing I pointed out was offensive rebounding. In the regular season, that wasn't a major deal in this matchup, but Phoenix was a top 10 offensive rebounding team in Minnesota. Well, they managed to barely they hovered right around the top 10, depending on where you look. So they were actually, the Wolves were 10th in defensive rebound rate on clearing the glass. Phoenix was 8th in offensive rebound rate. So I was a little bit concerned about that. And thus far in this series, the Timberwolves have done awesome on the glass. They were obviously a big plus that was much talked about in game 1. But just in terms of offensive rebounds, the Wolves had 10 more offensive rebounds than Phoenix in game 1. And they were only a -1 on the glass in game 2. But remember, when Phoenix was hanging around, and not just hanging around, but built a multiple possession lead, it got up to 8 points in the early kind of mid-second quarter of game 2, Phoenix's lead did. Phoenix was doing a lot of that with second chance points. It was offensive rebounding. And it wasn't necessarily like it wasn't just like Yusuf Nurkic. It was the long rebounds that were kind of in the mid-range that landed in the 8 to 18-foot range, right? Nurkic did have 6 offensive rebounds, but the rest of the Suns team as a whole had 5. Like, there were just a bunch that were just kind of bouncing around. Phoenix was getting to those balls, and offensive rebounding was an issue for those moments. Overall, the Wolves were only a -1 for the game. They were a +10 in game 1. So for the series, the Wolves are actually a +9 in terms of offensive rebounds. So that has been important. And in those, the few little windows in which Phoenix has outplayed Minnesota, offensive rebounding for Phoenix and defensive rebounding for Minnesota has been a major factor, which is exactly what I anticipated. Free throw shooting. I didn't necessarily have like a prediction on this one. I just thought it would be significant. And I guess maybe that's obvious, right? It pretty much always is in the playoffs, but both of these teams get to the line a bunch. Coming into the playoffs, we knew that the Suns were number 1 in offensive free throw rate. The Wolves were number 8 in offensive free throw rate. And in this series so far, it has proved to be notable, right? The Wolves actually shot 3 less free throw attempts than Phoenix in game 1. They won that game by 25. Game 2, they shot 11 more free throw attempts than Phoenix. And I talked a little bit about this, I think actually on the basketball party on Wednesday, the Wednesday basketball party show that a few of us do here in the audio feed post Wednesday afternoon. It's on YouTube on Locked On Sports Minnesota Wednesday mornings. I talked a little bit about how the Wolves and Suns get to the line in different ways, right? Phoenix isn't getting to the line by getting to the basket. Phoenix is getting to the line by getting you in the penalty because of the way that they play. Because they flail around and they flop quite a bit and they're trying to gain contact on every single play. And even if it's not resulting in free throws in the moment, they build up and you get the opponent into the penalty, right? Booker and Durant would be the primary. Nurkic would attempt to do that, but it's primarily Booker and Durant on the perimeter in the mid-range that are drawing these fouls. And Phoenix gets the line a bunch, but they don't shoot at the rim that often. And I talked about this on the basketball party that when Phoenix, their rim frequency is very, very low. They were 25th in the league in percentage of shots at the rim this year. By contrast, the Wolves were 9th in the league. Or no, I'm sorry. By contrast, the Wolves were 11th in the league in their rim attempt percentage. And so Phoenix, weirdly enough, they're number 1 in free throw rate, but they're number 25 in shot attempts at the rim because they're getting all these fouls drawn on these perimeter. You're getting teams in the penalty, getting themselves in the bonus, getting to the free throw line. And yes, they do draw fouls on mid-range shots because they're long, they're athletic, they can get their shots off, stop on a dime and get their, especially in the case of Booker, but also Durant, and get their shot off from anywhere, draw you into their web, and the defender commits a legitimate foul. I'm not saying that none of the foul calls against Phoenix are legitimate. I'm just saying that that's kind of their game, right? Minnesota gets the line because they're aggressive getting to the basket and because Rudy gets fouled a bunch, right? It's basically Ant and Rudy, and when Cat's on the floor, a little bit of Cat as well in terms of drawing fouls. So that's been important, and I think it's pretty interesting because if this is the area where it really helps the Wolves, right? If officials are going to allow a little bit more physicality in general, if somebody gets the rim and gets mugged, eventually you're going to get those calls, right? But they might let ticky-tack stuff go on the perimeter a little bit more. And we saw them call a little bit of it. Durant had that flurry of free throws. McDaniels got called for a couple of cheapies in game 2. But for the most part, a lot of that physicality on the perimeter is they're allowing it to play out. But they're not going to necessarily allow Ant, or if Booker or Durant ever actually got to the rim, they're not going to allow those guys to get clobbered at the rim without a foul call. So that benefits the Wolves because of the way the Wolves go about trying to get to the line. I want to talk about a couple more predictions that I'd made. I want to talk about my predictions for the weekend. We'll look at the FanDuel line for Friday night. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure might be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class-exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. It has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Today's episode is also brought to us by our friends at BetterHelp. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week, and that is still the lack of national respect for the Wolves in terms of championship odds. I understand that, the Thunder have a top 6 player in SGA. I get that the Nuggets have the best player in the league in Jokic. I get that the Celtics are the Celtics, but the Timberwolves have certainly the best depth of any playoff team. I don't think there's any question. They've got the 6th man of the year. They've got a starting caliber wing in Nickeil Alexander-Walker coming off the bench. They have the luxury of having a guy like Kyle Anderson. They didn't even have to play him the last game, right? This is a very deep team, and it's a team that can win without their stars scoring. And I think, to me, that should give the Wolves a bit of an edge when it comes to, who at this point has the best odds of winning the championship moving forward or winning the finals this year. We have to consider some of these other factors. It's not simply star power. I think that gets lost sometimes. Look, I get that people have problems that are bigger than their favorite sports team and the lack of respect on the national stage. But still, it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. And therapy looks different for different people. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If you do, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. I get that. Instead, just make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. Couple more predictions that I want to revisit from before the series. We talked about the forcing turnovers being really important and that flipping back the Wolves' direction like I thought it would. Offensive rebounding playing a part, and also free throw attempts. Let's talk about corner threes. I had a prediction before the series that corner three-point shooting would be huge. Phoenix was pretty middle of the pack in terms of what they allowed in the regular season in terms of corner threes. So let's look at this. So Phoenix, less than 10% of shots allowed against Phoenix's defense was corner threes. Minnesota was top 10. Nearly 11% of their shot attempts were corner threes, right? Which I know this doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking 100 possessions in a game, that's, the difference between 9.5% and 10.5%, almost 11% is between 1 and 3 3-pointers a game. And, attempt-wise, right? But if you make that 3-pointer, that's 3 points, right? Or you take that average, what is it, 1.5 points per game on average then. would be impacted by whether, the number of corner three shots. So it does matter. Even if we're talking 9.5 to 10.5, 11%, it does matter over the course of a full game, right? So Phoenix allows a fair amount of corner threes. They also had good luck with opponents shooting corner threes poorly against them. I think there's a lot of luck involved in opponent corner 3-point shooting percentage. I thought that was a bit of contributed to Phoenix's defense having some really good numbers, especially the second part of the season. The Wolves want to get corner threes. And then you layer in the fact that Phoenix wants to load up on Anthony Edwards wherever he's at on the floor. If he's got the ball in the wing, they're essentially playing him with three guys, right? Now, that's cooled a little bit in the playoffs, but for the most part, there's always two guys guarding Ant and sometimes a third, which means that weak side corner is going to be wide open if you can hit. Maybe it's a skip pass, but that's dangerous. So a lot of times it's a quick swing to the opposite corner. Or maybe it's swinging it to the top, back to Ant, back to the strong side corner, and you're getting a relatively open three. And I thought that would be a big part of what the Wolves did in the series. And it was. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, as big as he was in the first game, and that was another prediction I had, is that Nickeil would have a big series. The Wolves are actually only 3 of 10 shooting threes from the corners, which is, right in line. They had 88 field goal attempts in the game. 10 of them were from the corners. That's 11%, right in line with what they did in the regular season. They only made 3 of them, and yet they still won that game by 25. Game 2, they were 5 of 10 from the corners. They also had 78 field goal attempts because they got to the line a bunch more. Their actual field goal attempts were lower, which meant their percentage was 13%. So 13% of their shot attempts from the field came from the corners, which is greater than their season average, and nearly 4 points, about 3.5 points higher than what Phoenix typically allows per game. So very small sample, 2 games, but that's tracking toward what I expected. And they're 8 of 20 from the corners in this series, which is fine, right? I mean, I should be able to do math better than this. What is that? 8 of 20 is what's the percent? 40% from the corners, which is like, you'd love to be 45% from the corners. That's I think about league average in terms of 3-point shooting from the corners. But you'll take 40% from the corners. You'll take 10 attempts per game. If you could add 1 or 2 more, get to 11 or 12 attempts per game from the corners, that would be huge. The Wolves have a big 3-point volume advantage in this series already over Phoenix, and that's key too. Both these teams shot the three exceptionally well in the regular season in terms of percentage, and the Wolves actually only attempted slightly more threes per game than what Phoenix did. Very less than 1 3 more per game. But in this series, that gap has been much greater. Like just this last game, in game 2, Minnesota attempted 10 more threes than what Phoenix did. What was it in game 1? I know it was more. I'm going to pull it up real quick. In game 1, Minnesota attempted 4 more threes than Phoenix. So they've attempted 14 more 3-pointers than Phoenix in this series. That's huge. 3-point shooting is going to be a really, really big factor here, and especially those corner threes. I think that's it in terms of my predictions. I talked a little bit about mid-range jump shooting. Phoenix has done what you'd expect, which is a bunch of shots from the mid-range. If you look at the shot charts, Minnesota is a lot more in that 6 to 12 foot range, right? The top portion of the paint around the elbows, a little bit extended. Phoenix is a bit further out and a little bit more toward the wings, because that's where Durant, you look at game 2, and Durant, basically all his shots were from the right side of the floor in mid-range, smack dab in the middle, 12, 14, 16-foot range. That's where he likes to get to his spots. Well, the Wolves did a good enough job contesting him that it wasn't profitable for Durant and the Suns. So something else to continue to keep an eye on for sure. Okay. Let's take a look at the line for Friday night's game. And I'm gonna look at it right now because I looked at it earlier and I just want to make sure it didn't move at all. So I'm going to pull it up here, our friends at FanDuel, what the line is for Friday night game 3 in Phoenix. And it's still Suns -4. So the Timberwolves are -110 on FanDuel as 4-point underdogs. The money line is Timberwolves +150, which I'm not surprised. Well, I'll get into this in a second. Let's get into my take on the line here. And then I also want to give my prediction for both Friday and also Sunday, since we won't have a regular show until Monday following games 3 and 4. I mean, who knows? The series could be over by Monday. If you listen to Jack Borman on the Minnesota Basketball Party on Wednesday, he thinks this series is over. He thinks the Suns are cooked. He thinks this thing is over by Sunday night, and that we're talking, likely Wolves Nuggets, but breaking that down, next week already, which would be, I don't think anyone was expecting a sweep. I think we can be honest about that, right? I'm also going to pull up real quick the Lakers Nuggets score because I'm recording this during Lakers Nuggets. Nuggets are up 6 in the third quarter. So, Denver's likely to go up 3-0 in a series that I think we were all hoping would be a little bit more competitive. Anyway, we'll talk my predictions. We'll talk FanDuel and a couple more things here toward the end of the show. That's how we'll close out here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. They're constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so we said the Wolves are +4 in Phoenix on Friday night. They were 2.5, I believe 1.5 point favorites in game 1, 2.5 point favorites in game 2. So interesting here. Phoenix is favored by more in game 3 at home than the Wolves are favored in games 1 or game 2 in Minnesota, which surprises me a little. I expected Phoenix to be favored. I thought it would be 2, maybe 2.5, but to give them more than 3.5 is a genuine surprise to me. The Wolves money line at +150 is not the worst idea. I think the Wolves win on Friday night. I think that Phoenix is kind of in woe is me mode, and the Wolves, I think they smell blood. And I know that at times in the regular season, we saw this team kind of rest on their laurels and think like, okay, we're fine. Like this, whatever, this game doesn't matter. Sort of not like ever that they ever thought it didn't matter. That's the wrong way to say it, but be lackadaisical. Right. And while it wasn't the same as the 22-23 Wolves with the, losing to bad teams, because the Wolves were good against bad teams this year. It was the occasional against good teams. It was like, we can roll the ball out and play. We'll be all right. And then they would get blown out. They didn't lose very many close games. There were a couple late the season, the Denver game, the Cleveland overtime game, late in the season. But for the most part, the Wolves weren't losing close games. They were winning close games, and when they lost, they were few and far between, but they would get blown out. I think the Wolves win this game because they have the 2 days rest again. They're going to play extremely hard. They smell blood in the water. They want to go up 3-0. They have this mentality. I do think they were a good road team. They're one of the league's best road teams this year, the Wolves were. And I just think that for all those reasons, I think they'll have a great performance again on Friday. I worry a little about a letdown on Sunday. And I predicted this on Wednesdays at the end of the basketball party show on Wednesday. I think the Wolves win Friday for all the reasons I listed. The rest, they're good on the road, the blood in the water. They're going to go up 3-0. And also the swarming defense. I just think Phoenix is down on their luck right now, right? I do think Sunday there's some level of like this Phoenix offense can't be kept down forever. 2 of the 3 of Durant, Booker, and Beal are going to eventually have a good game. There's a lot of offensive firepower, and these guys have too much pride to be completely swept. I think they'll accept a gentleman's sweep. I think Phoenix would. Honestly, obviously they wouldn't say that, but I think that's kind of where they'll be mentally. And they'll make a last stand to win on Sunday. And I think the Wolves win Friday. I think the Suns win Sunday to avoid the sweep. And I know a lot of times the way this works is the team that's down 2-0 wins game 3. In fact, we saw this on both Wednesday I guess it would have just been on Thursday. We saw this from Philly winning back home and Orlando winning when they got back home, and both winning fairly convincingly. And the Magic won by almost 40 points. But I think the Wolves win Friday. I do. I just think the Suns managed to make that last stand on Sunday. And I think on Monday, we're talking about a 3-1 Wolves series lead heading into Tuesday. That's my prediction for the weekend. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's a sweep. I don't think Phoenix wins both games in Phoenix. I just think that I don't know. If Phoenix were to win on Friday, I'd be a little more worried about Sunday. Honestly, I think the Wolves could be a little. I just have that feeling. I don't know why, but all that to say, hopefully the Wolves win Friday, and then when a team's up 3-0, they're going to win the series. So then at least we can feel good about that. If they do win on Friday night. One last thing here. In terms of pivots for the Suns, adjustments the Suns could make leading into game 2, I thought the Suns might try and run more empty corner pick and rolls in the middle of the floor with overloading one side of the floor to try and pull help away, to try and keep the Wolves from having a low man help, because there were some situations in game 1, not very many, but there were a few times where the Suns had a roller, usually Nurkic, that was able to get free. And the Wolves would, their help in the when there was a emptied out a corner, when the Suns emptied out a corner, the Wolves weren't able to bring a low man as easily. And I was a little surprised the Suns didn't go back to more of that. The Suns just have been very stagnant offensively and have really been playing your turn, my turn, ISO ball. And I mean, we can go look at those box scores and it's what you'd expect, right? It's Beal was 6 of 17 in game 2. Game 1, Booker was 5 of 16, right? Durant was relatively efficient in game 1. Game 2, he was 6 of 15. And Booker, by the way, had 6 turnovers. Booker and Beal combined for 10 turnovers in game 2. Game 1, Durant had 5 turnovers, even though he shot the ball well from the field. So I would expect the Suns to do a little bit more in terms of running actions on offense. Now, I will say the Wolves have done a good job. Beyond just their isolation defense, they've switched their coverages to really keep the Suns guessing, right? Like they played a lot of drop. And when Gobert was in a drop, like he was Bradley Beal's worst nightmare. I mean, Beal couldn't squeeze the trigger and a mid-range jumper. Gobert was great. But the Wolves were also playing at the level. They were doing some switching. They mixed it a little bit of zone. Like as long as the Wolves keep doing that and they keep the Suns guessing, they mix in some of these different coverages, give them different looks. And if the Wolves can do that pretty seamlessly without major communication issues, there were just a couple plays over the course of the series so far where the Wolves got their wires crossed defensively and allowed a dunk or a layup. If they can avoid that, I just don't see how the Suns win more than one game in this series. The Wolves said after game 1, I think it was Towns who said, it was either Towns or Ann. I think it was Towns who said in the media after game 1 that they had a film session and they realized not just what they could do better offensively, but that they thought they could be much better defensively, which is a scary thought after holding the Suns to 95 points, 15 turnovers, 44% shooting, 32% from outside the arc in game 1. But that's exactly what happened. They held them to just 93 points, 19 turnovers, and still just 44% from the field in game 2, because they realized that they could switch some of these coverages up and mess with the Suns and really kind of leave them bewildered. And that's exactly what happened. I don't worry too much about the Wolves defense. I think if the Suns win a game, it's going to be because they have some sort of an offensive explosion. There's not much you can do about a 7-footer like Durant shooting the way he does when he gets hot, and Booker can get hot. They'll be at home. I know, that those are the things that may just happen to you. I worry more about the Wolves offense, right? The Wolves offense has had these fits and starts where like they needed 25 from Jaden McDaniels to win this last game. They still won by double figures despite Ant and Cat being quiet offensively. But how sustainable is this on the road if the other team does get hot? So all that to say, my prediction is Wolves win Friday, go up 3-0. Suns win Sunday. I think the Wolves will win game 5 back in Minnesota on Tuesday, win the series 4-1 when it's all said and done. That's my prediction. Reminder, we'll have the live postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube following Wolves Suns game 3 tonight. Remember, it's a 9:30 Central and 9:40ish Central tip on ESPN and also Bally Sports North. And then if you can't listen to it live, listen to the SiriusXM, the SXM app on SiriusXM. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves to listen to it on the SXM app. I'll be back on Monday with the post-game pod from Sunday's game. Hopefully it's a game 4 win for Minnesota, and we could talk looking ahead once we get past the weekend. But either way, I'll be back on Monday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.